Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DOB Now Build December 2020 release Tenant Protection Plan and Site Safety Plans training. As Mark said, we do expect that you have already attended one of the other trainings, so I'm not going to be going over some of the basics, but that information is available on the website. As you have seen in the other trainings that you, I hope, have attended, in addition to the question and answers, we're also going to be having a little bit of interactivity by asking polling questions. In fact, I'm going to put the first one up now. You may have already seen this in one of the other training sessions. Have you ever used DOB Now? Please answer that. And while you do, I'm going to talk about what we're going to do in today's training. We're going to start by going through tenant protection plans, and I'll give you a demonstration of how they work. And then we're going to go into site safety and talk about that process. There will be time at the end for questions. Your microphones are going to remain muted during this training, so please ask your questions through the Q&A. Any questions that cannot be answered during training today will be addressed in the FAQ that will be posted on the website. And in addition, you are going to receive a survey via email asking you what you thought of the training, and please do fill that out. We really do take them seriously because we try to make our training as valuable as possible. This is a slide that you may have also seen in the earlier trainings. A quick overview of the features and benefits of DOB Now Build. The system allows you to submit a job filing online. You don't have to go down to the DOB office for your borough to submit your filings. You get real-time job filing information online. If you want to check the status of your job filing at 3 in the morning, go right ahead. It's there. There's greater transparency of the filing process because you can view your job filing status at any time. And ideally, this will lead to faster processing time. So now let's talk about tenant protection plans. I'm going to get right into it. This training can be thought of as two modules, one on tenant protection plans, one on site safety. For the Tenant Protection Plan module, we're going to learn about the new updates and how they differ from the current process. You'll understand when a tenant protection plan must be submitted. You'll know how to submit a tenant protection plan request, also how to resubmit a tenant protection plan request if it fails the QA process. You'll know how to update and approve tenant protection plan, and you'll be able to view and print the occupant notice. So the tenant protection plan overview. We're going to start with a summary, and we'll talk about the current state versus the future state, and then we're going to get into the life cycle of the tenant protection plan request. We'll talk about when a tenant protection plan is triggered, the process for entering it, what happens with approval or QA failure, how to update and approve tenant protection plan, the impact of the tenant protection plan on the work permit, and we'll talk about how to print the occupant notice. So to start, I'd like to ask a quick question. How many people attending this class, this is a survey question as well, how many people attending this class have submitted a tenant protection plan using the current paper process? Please let me know. So that question will be up in just a moment. But while we're waiting for that, I'm going to start talking about what tenant protection plans are. So Local Laws 106, 116, and 118 of 2019 require that you submit a tenant protection plan for approval for any building in which one or more dwelling units will be occupied during alteration, construction, or demolition. No permit is going to be issued for work that requires a tenant protection plan unless that plan has been approved by DOB. Tenant protection plans can apply to almost all job filings that have or will have tenants. There's a handful of exceptions, and I'll go over them. Tenant protection plans do not apply to construction equipment, sidewalk, shed, construction fence, or supported scaffold, or to protection mechanical methods job filings. The current state is that you submit your tenant protection plan on paper using the TPP1 form, and you're going to need it approved. In addition, when you have a tenant protection plan on a building, DOB must be notified electronically 72 hours before you start work. That notification is on the DOB website, and that is not changing. This notification process is going to stay the same on this same website. If you get yourself a copy of this presentation, which you can get on the training page for DOB, you will be able to access this URL to access the notification form. In the current release, this is the one that's coming out on Monday. Stakeholders of the job filing will be notified of the need for a tenant protection plan when submitting the job filing, because there's going to be a system alert that comes up. And in addition, after the job filing has been approved, you'll get an email notifying you that a tenant protection plan is needed. The tenant protection plan review request can be initiated and submitted only after the job filing is approved. And then that request must be approved before a work permit may be requested. And our plan is for the future, we don't know yet exactly when, but just to be aware, this is coming. In the future, the tenant protection plan review request will be able to be submitted at the same time as you're completing the job filing. For right now, it needs to be done after the job filing is approved. So let's see if I can have my next survey question come up. True or false? A tenant protection plan can be required on any job filing. I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Now, while you're answering that, I'm going to start going through the process. It's a fairly straightforward process. This is the whole thing. It starts when the job filing plans are submitted by the applicant. They'll be reviewed and accepted by DOB. DOB Now, the system is going to then determine if a tenant protection plan is needed. If no tenant protection plan is needed, you can go straight to the permit request. However, if a tenant protection plan is needed, the applicant of record is going to be emailed notification that the tenant protection plan is needed upon approval of the job filing. You will then submit your tenant protection plan request, which will be reviewed and accepted by DOB. And looks like the vast majority of you got the correct answer. Tenant protection plans are not required for every job type. There's a couple of exceptions. So the tenant protection plan will be reviewed and accepted by DOB. And once it is, then you can move to request your work permit. Now, here's how it gets triggered, and it's a really straightforward thing. There's a single question that tells you if it's needed or not, and that question shows up in the owner attestation on the initial or subsequent job filing. In the owner's attestation, there is a question. The building to be altered, constructed, or demolished contains one or more dwelling units that will be occupied during construction. If you say yes, then a notification is going to pop up letting you know a tenant protection plan will be needed. This question will only be asked for job filings in which there is a work type that may trigger it. If you're doing a job filing that's just, for example, protection of mechanical methods, this question won't even be asked. In addition, if you answer yes, you need to note the number of dwelling units that will be occupied during construction. Now, like I said, this does show up on the owner's attestation, but it is not necessarily only the owner who can answer it. Anyone, including a filing rep or the design applicant, can enter the response. Only the owner can attest. Now, you cannot request your tenant protection plan, start the process until your job filing is in approved status. That's the bottom one here. You can always see the status of your job filing on the main job filings dashboard. Tenant protection plan requests can be initiated by any user with a licensed type of professional engineer or registered architect, even if they were not previously associated with the job filing. So we need a design professional, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the design professional who is the applicant of record on the job filing. There's two ways to begin the tenant protection plan process, and it depends on whether or not you're already associated with the job file. If you are not already associated, you can go to the Requests button, hover over the Plus Requests button, and choose Tenant Protection Plan. And then you will need to enter your job filing number. Click Search. If you are already associated, all you need to do is go to that line on your job filings dashboard, and in the drop-down, choose Request Tenant Protection Plan, and then click Yes to show that you would like to proceed. So let me show you that in the live system. I'm going to log in, go to my alterations dashboards, and I know the job number for which I need a tenant protection plan. So I'm going to start that. I type in the job number. I only typed in the last 4 digits. You don't have to type the whole thing. And then on the Select Action dropdown, I'm going to say Request TPP. Confirm that I want to do it, and the tenant protection plan request opens up. Once you have saved a tenant protection plan, it's going to show up on your tenant protection plan dashboard. The tenant protection plan dashboard is one that can be accessed from the action panel on the left side of your screen. You click on the 3 bars and then choose tenant protection plan, and then you'll see the tenant protection plan dashboard. I'll show that to you in a minute. Tenant protection plans have 4 tabs: general information, tenant protection plan, documents, and statements and signatures. In the general information, the system is going to pull all of the location information from the job file. However, the applicant of record for the tenant protection plan needs to fill out their information in the stakeholders section, even if they were the applicant of record on the PW1. The owner information is also auto-filled. Let's look at that. Location information and job details are already in there. In terms of stakeholders, the owner is already in there. But I need to enter the applicant, would be me in this case. Make sure you click on the address in the blue box because that fills in this information. I note my license type and my business name. At this point, we can save. Much like when you save in an initial job filing, when the tenant protection plan is saved, 2 things happen. One is that the tenant protection plan number shows up. Now, a tenant protection plan number has the letters TPP in the beginning. Then it has the entire job number, including the suffix, and then it has a code indicating how many tenant protection plans have been initiated on this particular job filing. Notice this one is 02. This is a second tenant protection plan. Up here, the status bar also shows up. It's really important to notice that the status is pending QA assignment and then QA review. All tenant protection plans go through QA review. Doesn't matter what type of review you chose for the job filing. Even if the job filing is standard plan, so it goes through a plan examiner, the tenant protection plan is still going to go through QA review. So let's go to our tenant protection plan tab. Now, what you need to do is you need to enter data into a bunch of fields, as you can see as I scroll down. Let's see a list of these. We talked about saving and the status bar and the tenant protection plan request number. So the specific fields here are egress, fire safety, health requirements, lead and asbestos, compliance with housing standards, structural safety, noise restrictions, maintaining essential services, and other requirements. These are the same sections that you were using for your tenant protection plans, but now they're in separate fields. So let's look at an example, a tenant protection plan that already had that filled out. We're going to go to our dashboard. We're going to go to our tenant protection plan dashboard. And specifically, I want to look for a tenant protection plan that's been submitted. This one will work. Now, notice in this one, it's sample data. I have another one that I can open for you later that has a real sample data, but you need to fill out all of these areas. When we go to documents, notice that there are no documents that are required. You can, if you choose, add additional supporting documents. So if you want to upload a document with all of your tenant protection plan data, you can do that, but you're still going to need to fill out each of the fields in the tenant protection plan tab. And then we get into statements and signatures. In the statements and signatures tab, there are 2 attestations required. The applicant of record for the tenant protection plan, so whoever put their information and general information, must attest. And in addition, the owner must log in and attest. We talked about this here. The documents show up, but there may be a document required in some circumstances. If the applicant for the tenant protection plan is not the same as the applicant of record for the job filing, then the tenant protection plan applicant is going to need to upload their DPL1, their seal and signature. And then both the applicant of record for the TPP and the owner will need to log in and attest. Once you're done, you submit your tenant protection plan. You do it by clicking on the submit button. Pretty straightforward, right? You will be asked to confirm, then you'll get a notification that the request has been submitted. DOB is going to review all tenant protection plan requests for approval, and you will be notified by email either that you have been approved or that your tenant protection plan has failed QA. So let's look at what it looks like when you fail QA. But first, I want to point something out. Once you submit your tenant protection plan, there's going to be a new tab that shows up in the main job filing screen. That's the tenant protection plan tab. Note there's also a site safety tab. We'll get to that in a little bit. You will be able to see your tenant protection plan, and you can double click on it to get into the request. We talked about the email notifying you of approval. You'll also see it in the tenant protection plan request dashboard and in the status bar for that request. If a tenant protection plan fails the QA process, it's visible in multiple places. You can see it on the TPP dashboard. You can see it on the status bar, and you can actually see it in the tenant protection plan tab inside the job file. You're also going to get an email letting you know why you failed QA, or why the tenant protection plan failed QA. Notice this one says the current DPL1 submitted has expired, so please submit an updated DPL1. The QA failed reasons are also going to appear in the tenant protection plan request. Let me show that to you. We're going to go back to our tenant protection plan dashboard, and we have one here that is QA failed. Let's take a look at it. there is now a QA failed reasons tab. If we go there, it tells me that the problem is with the DPL1. So what I would need to do in this case is go to my documents. Ideally, there would be a DPL1 here. If there was not. And since there wasn't, I'm just going to add it into my additional supporting documents. Choose my file and upload. And then it shows up here. Once you have made your changes, you can then resubmit your tenant protection plan. And it's going to give me an error because I haven't updated my statements and signatures. As you may have heard in the other training sessions, I really like that about DOB Now build because it lets me know if I've done something wrong. I go to statements and signatures and notice only the applicant of record needs to reattest. The owner's attestation is still there. So I click there and now I can resubmit. I need to save first. Make sure I do it right. Then I resubmit. And I go back to my dashboard. So you may need to upload your document again, re-upload, or upload a new document as I showed you. In general, whatever the issue that was raised by, excuse me, QA, you must address it. You may also need to change some of the details of your tenant protection plan, depending on what happens. If that's the case, you go into the tenant protection plan tab and change your information before uploading. The applicant of record needs to reattest, and then you can save and click resubmit. We went through that whole process. Once a tenant protection plan is approved, you can actually update it. So the way you do that is, again, in the TPP request dashboard, or from the tenant protection plan tab in the main job filing screen, you go to the select action dropdown and choose Update Approve TPP. You'll click Yes to confirm that you want to do that. You'll be brought back into the main TPP request screen. You make your changes and then save and submit. Let's look at that. So I have an approved tenant protection plan here and I want to update it. I click that, I confirm, I go in and I make my changes. And just in case, I'm going to make sure that I reattest. So I click on the attestation. I save, because you always have to save before you submit. And then you submit. The owner needs to reattest. I'm not going to be able to do that right now. But you'll also notice that it's saying it's a post-approval amendment, but there's no fee associated with this. This is just an update to the tenant protection plan. And you'll notice that the request number is 02 because it's a new version of the prior approved tenant protection plan. Now, if you have a tenant protection plan, there's a couple of things that change in the work permit. As we said multiple times before, you cannot even request your work permit until the tenant protection plan is approved. Once it's submitted, the wording of the applicant attestation changes on the permit request. Specifically, this paragraph gets added. In addition, if there is an approved tenant protection plan, the work permit that is printed is going to change slightly because it's going to also include the total number of dwelling units at the location and the number of dwelling units that will be occupied during construction. There is also an occupant notice which must be printed and displayed at the job site. You can do it once the permit is approved. So the permit holder, the person who submitted the permit application, is the only one who can print the occupant notice, and they do it from the work permits dashboard. They go to the work permits, click on select action, and choose print occupant notice. If the permit is amended or the permit holder changes, a new occupant notice must be printed. So the occupant notice depends on the permit, because if you'll notice, it includes the permit number. Any questions you have about tenant protection plans can be submitted to the Q&A now, but you can also submit them electronically after this training at nyc.gov/DOB-help. So we learned about the new tenant protection plan updates and how they differed from the current process. You should now understand when a tenant protection plan must be submitted. You should be able to submit a tenant protection plan request, resubmit a tenant protection plan request in response to QA failure, update an approved tenant protection plan, and you should know how to view and print the occupant notice. So now let's move on to site safety. And I have a quick survey question. How many of you have been responsible for creating a site safety plan or submitting a site safety waiver on a job site? I'll give you a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll get into site safety. So while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about what we're going to learn in this section. In this module, you're going to learn about the new updates to the DOB Now build and how they differ from the current process for site safety. You'll understand when a site safety plan must be submitted. You'll be able to submit a site safety plan request or a site safety waiver request. You'll be able to respond to objections and schedule appointments. You can resubmit site safety plans or site safety waivers. You can update an approved site safety plan or site safety waiver. And you're going to be able to request a work permit with site safety personnel. That section of this training I covered in the work permit training as well, the ones that were aimed at contractors. But I want to make sure that's clear in this training. So we're going to start with an overview of site safety plans. Then we'll go to the current state versus future state. And then we're going to start with the rules and triggers about when site safety plans are needed. We'll talk about the process. You'll see what it looks like with approval or how you handle objections and schedule appointments. We'll talk about how to update approved site safety plans or a site safety waiver. And then we'll talk about the impact on the work. So here's some of the basics. Site safety plans can be triggered by general construction, structural, foundation, supportive excavation, and earthwork work types. However, the work type isn't enough. There's actually some other characteristics that determine whether a site safety plan is required. I'm going to go through all of those, but it's determined by the system based on how you answer certain questions on the job file. What's important to know is if you are responsible for creating a job filing, whether it's an initial job filing or a subsequent job filing, you will not be able to file professional certification with PW2 until the site safety requirement has been determined. And the determination of site safety will be made after the job filing is approved. I'll talk about that again on the next slide. In general, site safety plans will exist at the job filing level. So each filing may need a site safety plan. The site safety plan can be waived, but waivers must be approved by DOB. The current process is you submit your plan or your waiver to DOB as a PDF email attachment. DOB reviews it and either approves it or raises objections to be met before approval. So much like tenant protection plans, there's actually two stages of what's happening. In this current release, the one that's coming out on Monday, a site safety plan or a site safety waiver can only be submitted after the job filing has been approved. Now, it's important to note that the moment the job filing is approved, you cannot file a site safety waiver. You need to wait until the system is aware that a site safety plan is needed. The determination of the need for a site safety plan may take up to 24 hours after job filing approval. And once it does, you can submit the plan or the waiver via DOB Now Build. At some point in the future, we don't have a date yet, but we are planning to make it possible for you to submit site safety plans or site safety waivers at the same time as you're submitting the job filing without needing to wait for approval. But we're not there yet. Let's talk about the key stakeholders for site safety. First of all, there's the applicants of record, registered architects, professional engineers, and licensees. There's some other stakeholders like property owners, job filing representatives, and licensees. And then there's the site safety personnel. Site safety personnel consist of site safety managers, site safety coordinators, and construction superintendents. And they go in that order. A site safety coordinator is considered a higher level than a construction superintendent. And a site safety manager is considered a higher level than a site safety coordinator. In general, a higher level role can substitute for a lower level. Now, if the site safety trigger notes that you can have a site safety coordinator or a site safety manager, either one is acceptable. However, if there's more than one trigger that has been set, the more stringent requirements are applied. And by the way, the reason that coordinators and managers are considered a higher level of supervision than construction superintendents has to do with how many sites they can oversee. Construction superintendents can supervise up to 10 job sites. Site safety coordinators and site safety managers can only supervise a single job site. So obviously they're going to be paying more attention to that job site if they don't have to go to other job sites. Now, if the required role is a construction superintendent, the site safety plan does not need to be submitted to DOB for approval. You will need to have a site safety plan and keep it on site, but you will not need DOB approval. However, if you want to submit a site safety waiver for a job that requires a construction superintendent, that does need approval. So, quick question. Have you ever acted as a site safety personnel at a job site? Just let me know yes or no, please. While you're answering that, let's talk about site safety triggers. I know this is complicated. I'm going to explain how to read it, but I'm not going to explain every line on this chart. The reason this chart is here is because it is valuable to you to know when a site safety plan is required. Because even if you can't submit it until after the job is approved, you can start getting it ready. So when you are submitting the job, if you use this chart, you're going to be able to determine if a site safety plan is required and what level of personnel are required. So let's talk about how to read this. I'm going to read across on this first line. If you are doing horizontal enlargement of a building, anytime you are doing horizontal enlargement, you at minimum need a construction superintendent. That's why it says any construction superintendent. However, depending on the characteristics of the building, you may need a higher level personnel to be responsible for site safety. If the building is 10 to 14 stories tall, you get a choice. You can have a site safety coordinator or a site safety manager. If the building is greater than 15 stories or more, then you need a site safety manager. The coordinator is not an option. Let's this height. Same thing for the building height in feet. If it's 125 to 199 feet, oops, you have a choice of site safety coordinator or site safety manager. If it's greater than or equal to 200 feet, you need a site safety manager. Same thing for structural footprint. If it's less than or equal to 100,000 square feet, you have a choice. But if it's over 100,000 square feet, you need a site safety manager. And you read across for any of these. Now, some of them will only have a construction superintendent. And some of them will only have the option of a site safety coordinator or site safety manager. But you can use this chart to determine what is required. Now let's talk about how this applies at various job levels. We have an alteration job that we file on January 1st, and it's our initial filing. This initial filing consists of two work types, general construction and structure. General construction and structural both can require site safety. On March 15th, we submit our first subsequent filing. That one is sprinkler and plumbing. Those cannot possibly trigger site safety. They're not categories that trigger site safety. So we'll skip those for now. But on June 30th, we have subsequent filing 2, which is earthworks. And that also can trigger site safety. That's why these are circled in red. Let's talk through this. If the initial filing triggered the site safety plan, then the subsequent 2 filing can also trigger the need for a site safety plan. If I1 did not trigger the site safety plan, it can still get triggered by S2. If the SSP was waived in I1, it can still get triggered by S2. Now, if a post-approval amendment was filed on either of these, but specifically we're looking at the initial filing. If you had a PAA on the initial filing, it could affect the applicability of the site safety plan. And in addition, if I1 triggered the need for a construction superintendent stakeholder, then S2 can trigger the need to upgrade the stakeholder to site safety coordinator or site safety manager. Now, remember how I told you you can't do it until the job filing has been approved? Once the job filing has been approved, if a site safety plan is needed before the work permit can be submitted, the system's going to flag the work permit request. It will say site safety is required for this job filing, and it won't let you open the work permit request, and only will let you open site safety. If it hasn't yet figured out, remember how I told you there could be a 24-hour delay between approval and determination of the need for site safety? If you try to file a work permit before that determination, it's going to let you know the site safety requirement on the job file is not determined yet. You can contact DOB or you can wait. In general, the work permit may not be requested until the relevant site safety plan approval process is complete and approval is granted. So let's look at this and see it in the live system. Excuse me, I'm trying to turn the page and it's being stubborn. If you are not taking action on the system for a certain amount of time, then you will need to re-log in. So we're going to go back to the main job filings page because I want to look for some specific jobs. Now this is a job filing that's been approved. So let's see if I can submit my work permit. This says site safety may be required on this filing. So I can't submit my work permit until this has been determined. Now let's look at another one. For this one, I'm asking for my work permit, and it says the same thing. It may be required. Let's try one more. One actually should be telling me that site safety is required. But we can tell that based on something else. The request site safety option in the dropdown does not show up until site safety has been determined to be relevant. But we'll talk about that in a second. Let's look at the process. First thing you do is you submit your job file with the PW1 to DOB. They're reviewed and accepted by DOB. The system is then going to determine if site safety is needed. If no site safety is required, you can request your permit. If it is required, you'll need to submit the site safety plan or site safety waiver and wait for it to be reviewed and accepted before you can get your permit. But we're not done there, because on the permit request, the contractor needs to identify the stakeholder for site safety, whichever the role is. And then that site safety personnel must log into the system and attest to their duties before the permit can be submitted. The permit then gets reviewed and accepted by DOB, and once it is, the permit can be pulled and printed, and that's when the permit is issued. Now, the site safety personnel in general are going to have the ability to view the entire job filing record, including any and all documents, but they won't have the ability to change anything but the parts that they are responsible for. So, job filing needs to be approved, and this is important. Any user can upload the site safety plan or the site safety waiver. It does not need to be a design applicant, design professional, excuse me. It does not need to be the applicant of record. They don't even need to be associated with the job in order to upload the site safety plan or the site safety waiver. Now, the way you get into a plan or a waiver depends on whether you're currently associated with the job. And this is going to look really familiar from what we went over in the tenant protection plan. If you are currently associated with the job, it's going to show up in your job filings dashboard. And you just go to the select action dropdown and choose request site safety. If you're not currently associated, you go to your plus requests button, choose site safety, and then you'll have to put in the job number in order to request it. Remember what I told you? Request site safety is not going to appear in the select action dropdown until the system has determined that a site safety plan is needed. So if it's there, then you can do it. If it's not there, then you can't. Actually, before I get into this, let's talk about what happened. First thing you're going to be asked is, are you entering a site safety plan or are you entering a site safety waiver? We're going to go through plans first, and then we'll come back and look at what happens if you submit a waiver instead. When you go into your site safety plan, there are 3 tabs: general information, documents, and statements and signatures. Now let's look at this. So the same job filing, I'm going to request site safety. It asks me, do I want to do a plan or a waiver? Let's start with a plan. And here are my 3 tabs: general information, documents, and statements and signatures. The request information and the location information is all pulled from the job filing and cannot be changed. The stakeholders information does need to be entered. More specifically, the applicant for the site safety plan needs to be entered. You do it by choosing the email, clicking on the drop down, identify what their license type is. They could even be a preparer, it doesn't matter. And the business name. You can enter comments, but you are not required to. Now, I'll show you this in a moment, but once you've saved a site safety plan request or a site safety waiver request, whether or not you submitted it, you can see it on the site safety requests dashboard. You get to that the same way you got to the Tenant Protection Plan dashboard. Click on the 3 bars in the action panel and choose Site Safety Requests. And then you'll get your list of site safety requests. And we'll also note what the request type is. Double click on a line to see that request. We talked about how the location information is pulled by the job filing. We talked about how you have to enter your applicant information, but the owner information will be pulled from the job filing. And the comments field. You must save your site safety request before it will let you move to the next tab, which is Document. Because if I try to click on Documents, it tells me save the filing to continue. So let's save it. And then let's go to Documents. There is one document that's required, and that is your site safety plan. Pretty straightforward, right? Whatever the plan is that you've put together, that's what you need to upload. And that's what you see here. Press the upload button to add the document. This is the only document that is required. This is also the only document that is allowed. There's no option to upload additional documents. In the statements and signatures, only the applicant for the site safety plan needs to attest, and they do it by clicking the checkbox. The site safety personnel will need to attest in the work permit, but not here. Let's upload a document. I can show you the process. Choose File. I'm getting my test document. Upload. Okay. I have a document there. We're waiting for it to be approved. I go to Statements and Signatures. And I, as the applicant of the site safety plan, am the only one who needs to attest. So I do that. I'm going to save. And then I'm going to click Submit. And it moves from pre-filing to pending PE assignment. We also get a site safety plan number, which starts with SS for site safety, and then ends with a code indicating how many plans or waiver requests there have been. I've used this filing a lot, so notice that we're up to 6. And if I go back to my dashboard, and I go to my site safety request dashboard, then that's the one that I see right here in pending PE assignment. Now let's look at what happens. We talked about saving. Before you submit, click Yes to confirm. You get a pop-up noting that you will be emailed when the site safety request is reviewed and the status bar moves. Now let's go back to the beginning and talk about what happens when you choose the site safety waiver. In order to do that, I'm actually going to have to delete that one that I already submitted. You can do that from the Select Action and choose Delete. We'll ask you if you're sure you want to do that, and I'll say yes. So let's go back to my job filings dashboard and go back to that job filing. And we're going to go back to Request Site Safety. And this time, I'm going to request a site safety waiver. There's not going to be much difference at this point. The only difference is that there's a different document required. Let me show that. Still need to put in my stakeholders information. This time comments are required because I need to, and so I need to do that so we can even see the documents. Comments are required to explain why you are requesting a waiver. Site safety not needed because, and then you put in your reasons. We'll hit save. It still says site safety request is saved, even though it's a waiver. Now we go to documents, and the document that is required is the site safety waiver, CSC waiver letter. That's the only difference. I still need to attest. And obviously the information was needed. But other than that, there's no difference between submitting a site safety plan request and a site safety waiver request. Now, if you notice the status bar, it says that it goes through a plan examiner review. We talked about how in tenant protection, it always goes through QA review, no matter how the initial job filing was reviewed. Well, the same is true here, except in reverse. Site safety plans always go through plan examiner review, even if the initial job that you are filing on was filed professional certification. Now, ideally, you're going to be approved. You'll get an email notifying you that you're approved. You'll see it in the Site Safety Plan dashboard. You'll see it on the status bar in the Site Safety Plan request. And you'll also see it, there's going to be a Site Safety tab in the main job file. And you'll see it there. Let's see what happens if there's an objection. Same places that you see approval, you'll see objection. You'll get an email. You'll also see it on the Site Safety Plan dashboard. You'll see it on the status bar and in the Site Safety tab inside the job file. If there is an objection, there's going to be a new tab inside the Site Safety Plan request, Objections/Appointments, which contains two sections, Objections and Schedule Appointment. Let's look at that. I'm going to go to my Site Safety Requests dashboard, and we see that there are objections here. Let's look at that. You go to Objections/Appointments, and you'll see there are two objections. If you want to see more details, you can open up the objection, and it will tell you, for example, proposed corridors do not comply with this. You can set your objections to resolved and enter comments. And you click Update. Now, clicking Update isn't necessarily, setting it to resolved and clicking Update isn't necessarily going to solve the problem and allow you to resubmit your site safety plan, because one of the updates to the system in this release is that plan examiners have the option, when they issue objections, of allowing appointments or not, and making appointments mandatory or optional. If they have made appointments mandatory, then even if you set your objections to resolved, it will not do it. It says the plan examiner has indicated that an appointment is required. So you need to enter your appointment. And it also gives you this red exclamation point. To schedule an appointment, you click on Plus Appointment. Put in your required attendees. Schedule your date, and it's only going to let you schedule on dates that are available. You schedule your time. Now, what this is showing all the times, but in the actual system, it will only show you the times that are truly available. And put in your meeting intent. Confirm, and then you'll be able to attend your appointment. This talks about editing your objections, setting them to resolved. This talks about how to schedule appointments, all the steps I just took. Enter required attendees, appointment date, meeting time, and meeting intent, and click schedule. If the appointment is required, you are not going to be able to close the objection and resubmit before the appointment happens. During the appointment, you will be able to do that. And the plan examiner has some new options as well. If whatever the issue is not resolved during the appointment, the plan examiner, as we talked about in the design professional training, has the option of issuing a continuation which allows you to schedule another appointment without closing and reopening the request. So we talked about how if there's no mandatory appointment, you at minimum need to mark the objections as resolved and save your update in order to click resubmit. If the appointment is mandatory, you can't do it until the appointment date and time, as I just said. And the applicant is going to need to re-sign the request before you resubmit. So this is the process for appointments. You need to go into the Objection Appointments tab, edit, update your objection status and comments, click the update button, click plus appointment, select attendees, date and time, and click schedule. If there's documents to re-upload, you can do that. Review, complete your applicant statement and signature, and then resubmit. An approved site safety plan can be updated. What you'll do is you'll go to the Select Action dropdown and click Update Approved Site Safety and say yes. It'll take you back into the site safety plan request process to make changes. Save and submit the updated site safety plan for approval. It's really straightforward. I showed you the process for tenant protection, so I'm not going to show this to you right now. Now let's talk about what happens in the work permit. If there is a site safety plan, you need to identify the site safety personnel on the work permit request. There will be a tab in the work permit request for site safety. You need to make sure the correct role is selected. The roles that are selected will depend on the triggers. So you may have more than one role selected, but make sure that the one that you are using is selected. Enter the email of the site safety personnel and their license type. And then that person is going to need to log into DOB Now Build and attest to their duties. Note that it says here, I hereby state that I will perform on behalf of the contractor all of the functions required of a construction superintendent, site safety coordinator, or site safety manager, as set forth in all the Department of Buildings rules and regulations. So they're just attesting that they're going to do what they're saying they're doing. Once the permit is granted, you can now print your work permit. And there is an update on the work permit for site safety as well. Specifically, the site safety personnel are going to be identified by name on the work permit. In addition, the site safety plan must be stored at the job site. And this is required whether or not the plan was approved by DOB. Remember, if it's a construction superintendent, the plan does not need approval, but the plan does need to exist and be stored on site. So let's do one last question to make sure that this is going to be a knowledge check. Who can submit a site safety plan? Please choose your response. In fact, I'm going to answer this too. While we're waiting for this, I'm going to talk about what we learned in this module. You learned about the new updates and how they differ from the current process. You should now understand when a site safety plan must be submitted. You should be able to submit a site safety plan request or a site safety waiver request. You should be able to respond to objections and schedule appointments. You should be able to resubmit a site safety plan or site safety waiver request. Update a site safety plan or site safety waiver. And you should know how to request a work permit with site safety personnel. But that's the material that I am covering in today's class. We will remain on the line for questions. Oh, and it looks like the majority of folks did get the correct answer, which is any user can submit a site safety plan. So we're going to remain on the line for questions. If you have any, please put them into the question and answer. And thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand it over to the host now.